There seems to be a perception amongst Agile practitioners that Kanban is better than Scrum. The most common argument that is used is because Kanban has fewer meetings than Scrum and it only has boards to start with. Some people see Scrum has too many rules that are restricting them. Some Agile practitioners, especially developers, perceive that the Scrum events are a waste of time and they think they should spend their time writing codes rather than being present in those Scrum events. In today's podcast episode, folks, I will share with you how companies who are using Kanban can also end up as feature factories. So if you want to hear my thoughts, stick around because I will be back right after this one. Hey, welcome back to another podcast episode of the Scrum Mastermind, everyone. I hope you're having a great week so far. We are now on episode 21, and in today's episode, I would like to share with you how, just like Scrum, Kanban can be misused also. And this misusage can have negative consequences towards the people in the company. Now, the purpose of today's episode is not to defend Scrum, but to bring some objectivity about both Scrum and Kanban. I feel that the misuse of Kanban is rarely published on the internet, and I feel that Kanban doesn't get as much criticism as Scrum in the Agile community. So I would like to start off today's episode with a saying: it's very easy to judge something as bad based on our limited view of it. And I often use the analogy of the four blind people and an elephant to describe this kind of attitude. The blind person who touched the trunk of the elephant may judge that it is a snake, while the other blind person who touched the ear of the elephant may judge that it's a giant fan. The other blind person who touched the tail of the elephant may judge that it's a rope. And the other blind person who touched the tusk of the elephant may judge that it is a spear. I feel that this is how some people criticize Scrum or compare Scrum to Kanban based on their limited view of both Scrum and Kanban. Scrum is just a framework. If a framework is a thing, a framework can also be used for good, and on the other hand, it can be used for the wrong purpose also. Someone's perception of that thing can skew the fact of that thing. If I had a bad experience with Scrum that was misused by someone else in a company, that does not make Scrum as bad. Now, interestingly, whenever I hear or read some criticism about Scrum, I notice that the individual criticizing it quite often has a bad experience with Scrum because someone else in the company that person worked for either misuse Scrum or uses it under the wrong understanding. Throughout today's episode, I will share and quote the concept of Kanban from two main Kanban schools of thoughts in the market today. The first school of thought is Kanban University and the second one is prokanban.org. Both of them have published their own Kanban guide and made it freely available on the internet. Both Kanban guides have subtle differences. I suggest that you read both of them. Link to both of these Kanban guides are in the description section. Kanban University and prokanban.org define Kanban differently. Kanban, according to Kanban University, is a method, while Kanban, according to prokanban.org, is a strategy. Now, while both schools of thoughts do not have the same definition on Kanban, both are similar in terms of not elaborating the concept of teams. In fact, prokanban.org Kanban guide only mentions the word team twice. Now, this is because Kanban can be used in a non-team based context. That's why there's no such thing as Kanban team. Team, on the other hand, is an important notion in Scrum. The work that is done by the Scrum team is a collective effort and not the sum of individual contribution. That's a big difference. Since the concept of team is not mentioned in both Kanban guides, both Kanban schools of thoughts do not mention anything on team members' accountability also, which is quite understandable because both Kanban schools of thoughts do not position Kanban as a framework. That's why it doesn't go as far as mentioning accountability of each individual doing the work. But I personally think that knowing the accountability of each team member is important. Now, imagine if you work in a team who does not have any accountability or ownership towards the product they're developing. Imagine if the Scrum Master or the product owner in a Scrum team don't have any accountability at all? And also imagine about the quality of the product being delivered by the Scrum team when there is lack of accountability. In fact, as accountability is an important notion in Scrum, Scrum Guide itself specifically mentioned that the developers' accountability is holding each other accountable as professionals. With clear accountability, there is peer pressure. Now that is important because self-management is one of the key tenets in Scrum. And without peer pressure, self-management becomes chaos. In many cases, with clear accountability, there is pride with the product that the Scrum team is developing. However, both Kanban schools of thoughts do not explicitly mention anything on accountability. And because both Kanban guides do not mention on the concept of teams and team members' accountability, it is possible for a group of people who already display their work transparently on the Kanban board not operate as a team. Now, I want you to be careful not to fall in a perception that when you see there's a group of people working together, they are deemed as a team. A group of people working together does not make them a team, because it is very possible for each individual in that group to have their own personal agenda and focus on their individual key performance indicator. When people focus on their individual agenda, they're not a team. I have seen a group of people using Kanban who are still working in silos and only picking up work items from the column that is related to their job title. So testers only pick up work from the testing column, engineers only pick up work items from the development column, UX designers only pick up work items from the design column, etc. And I have also seen managers assign work from the Kanban board to people. The people are not self-managed. I've also seen people from time to time again only using a Kanban board just as a to-do list and seeing their job to burn as many items from their Kanban board. Now, if you look at any sports teams, they play towards a common goal, which is to win every match at any cost. Now, each player in a sports team doesn't focus on their personal key performance indicator. They focus on the overall team's goal. And goals is another thing that the two Kanban schools of thoughts do not mention explicitly in their guides. On the other hand, goals are very important in Scrum. Scrum, as a goal-driven framework, defines two goals: the product goal and also the sprint goal. The product goal and the sprint goal in Scrum is not about how much product backlog items to be completed by the Scrum team, but it is related with the value to customers, which means the Scrum team can deliver less product backlog items than they have planned, but still able to deliver value or outcome to the customers. Now, in relation to value-driven goals, I'd also like to touch on metrics. Scrum itself does not mention any specific metrics that the organization or the Scrum team needs to track. Now, this can be a good thing or it can also be a bad thing, depending on one's perception. Velocity is not a Scrum metric, even though many people would like to think it is. On the contrary, both Kanban schools of thoughts have defined Kanban metrics that need to be tracked by organizations using Kanban. The names they use are slightly different, but it's referring to the same thing. Now, I'd like to say that metrics are not bad because metrics are just indicators. We need metrics to make decisions. But metrics, just like many things in life, can be used for the wrong purpose also. I have seen companies misusing the Kanban lead time or cycle time to press their people to work harder and faster. On the other hand, I've also seen people cut quality to make their lead time or cycle time look fast, because these people know that their performance is being measured by their lead time or cycle time. I've also seen companies that use delivery rate or throughput metric to measure individual performance, and the metrics are being used for stack ranking. And it's also not rare to see people in organizations that misuse these Kanban metrics competing against each other rather than collaborating. The way I see it, metrics seems to be an important notion in Kanban. You get to see many Kanban practitioners talk about Kanban metrics in conferences or community meetups. But I personally think, just like many things in life, having too much of something can be bad for you. Now, when organizations overemphasize Kanban metrics and yet they do not have the right understanding of how to use it, they can move towards becoming a feature factory. I believe in knowledge work, the number of output delivered does not guarantee that outcome or value is delivered to customers. In this episode, folks, I'd also like to point out critiques on there are just too many meetings in Scrum. Now, definition of meetings is where the two Kanban schools of thoughts differ. ProKanban.org do not specify any meetings that organizations using Kanban need to run, but in the Kanban guide from Kanban University, there's a sample of 3 cadences as a starting point. Now, bear in mind, because these 3 are just a starting point, it is very possible for organizations using Kanban have more meetings than organizations using Scrum. The first cadence defined in the Kanban University Kanban Guide is the daily Kanban meeting, which is like the daily Scrum, with the difference that the conversation in the daily Kanban meeting doesn't focus on goals, but instead it focuses on the flow and the status of the work displayed on the Kanban board. Now, while many Scrum teams are moving away from making the daily Scrum being a status meeting, take notes that the daily Kanban meeting may end up as a status update meeting because the focus of the conversation is the flow and the status of the work displayed on the Kanban board. Now, besides the daily Kanban meeting, Kanban, according to Kanban University, should also have replenishment meeting, which is quite similar to sprint planning in Scrum. But the difference is, just like the daily Kanban meeting, the replenishment meeting doesn't emphasize on goals. Instead, it emphasizes on piping up the work. Now, without proper understanding, the replenishment meeting may also end up as an opportunity to push as much work as possible towards the group of people. And lastly, Kanban, according to Kanban University, has a team retrospective meeting, which is quite similar to sprint retrospective in Scrum. Now, up to this point, you should be wondering, how come Kanban, according to Kanban University, do not mention anything about review meeting? How come the review meeting isn't defined in their Kanban guide? So isn't reviewing the work that has been delivered is important in Kanban? Or is this just a way for Kanban University to make Kanban have fewer meetings than Scrum? If that is what Kanban University tries to do to make Kanban have one fewer meeting than Scrum, I personally think it can also lead to negative perception about Kanban, that Kanban's focus is just about delivering more work without needing to review the value delivered to customers. And I have seen this misperception happen on the field. So in today's podcast episode, folks, I just pointed out to you that it's very easy for companies who use Kanban after reading either of the 2 Kanban guides end up as feature factories because both Kanban guides does not explicitly mention the concept of team, accountabilities of each team members, value-driven goals, and review meeting. Some companies may also end up as feature factories when they overemphasize the Kanban metrics that I personally think are output-driven and when they do not emphasize value-driven or outcome-driven metrics enough. So if misperception can happen in companies using Scrum, I also personally think misperception can also happen in companies using Kanban. Unfortunately, misperception about Kanban does not get published quite as much as companies who has misperception about Scrum. So to close off today's episode, I would like to say to you that with a limited perspective or understanding, Kanban have the same potential to harm the company also. Now, incompleteness or ambiguity in Kanban are not always a good thing because ambiguity and incompleteness can also open up more possibilities for misinterpretation. Now, on the other hand, the completeness and the relation between each Scrum element can actually be a good model for teams and organizations who are looking to improve their agility in value delivery. Again, it's a matter of perspective. And our perception does not make Scrum or Kanban better than the other. We shouldn't even compare both of them because they are totally different and incomparable. However, with the right understanding, Scrum can be beneficial, just like with the right understanding, Kanban can be beneficial for our company too. Now, that is all from me today, folks. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and enjoy the rest of your week. I hope you found value in today's episode. I will see you in the next episode. Take care. Bye now.